Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Michael Regina. I am the author and illustrator of the all-ages horror graphic novel The Sleepover from Penguin Razorbill, and you can pick it up anywhere books are sold. And I'm back here with my next video, which is another interview with an artist friend of mine, my friend Wes Molebash, who's the creator of Travis Daventhorpe for the Win, the whole Travis Daventhorpe series that'll be coming out over the next few years. Sat down with me to talk about comics, his journey into making comics, and then about our faith as it relates to our storytelling. I thought it was just a really fun, freewheeling conversation between two people. We've known each other for quite a bit of time, so it was very easy to sort of ease into just talking to him like a friend. But we recorded it and we put it out here for you all to see. I definitely recommend Travis Daventhorpe. This book is fantastic. Really just have nothing but nice things to say about it. Wes is such a talented creator and cartoonist, so I'm so super happy for him and excited that he's getting to share this story with the world. So looking forward to sharing that interview with you. Before I forget to, I also want to point you over to a recent podcast review interview with me on a podcast called Strawberry Milkshake. I'll put the link down in the description below. It's a fun little interview from a young podcaster as she reviewed my book and did a short interview with me about it. So if you'd like to see that, click on that link below and learn more. But without further ado, let's jump into the interview with Wes. I am interviewing my friend and comics creator, Wes Molebash. He and I have gone back a good bit of years, had a lot of conversations with each other as we were trying to figure out how to make it into this children's book world and get books published. So I reached out to him and asked if he'd like to get there and chat. His most recent book is Travis Daventhorpe for the Win, which is a ton of fun. And seriously, like, probably my favorite graphic novel of this year. I've had a great time with it and really loved it. And our friend Josh, like, he and I talked, we're like, dang, gummit, Wes. He knocked it out. So I'm excited to talk with you and just, let anyone who might be here get to know you and then talk shop together and just kind of see where it goes. So obviously, if you have questions for me, I just want it to kind of be a fun discussion back and forth.
Love it.
Yeah. So why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and if for those who might not know you, kind of how you got into comics and yeah, sort of your origin with comic books.
Yeah. So yeah, my name is Wes Molebash, and I live in Southern Ohio with my family, and very quiet town. And I've loved cartoons and comics since I was a kid, and realized like in probably middle school is when I fell in love with Calvin and Hobbes, but I was holding on to the wanting to be a Disney animator dream until like high school. I started discovering more comic strips and realizing that I could control, that would be all me. If I worked for Disney, I'd be a cog in a machine. Whereas if I had my own comic, I could be the writer, the director, the actors, all that stuff would be all up to me. So I like that idea. And so, in the 90s, it was a lot harder than it is now to get information about how to break into comics. It was, there was a book, I can't even remember the title of it, 99. I bought it in 1999 off Amazon when Amazon was just books.
Yeah.
And it was outdated then. But yeah, like just everything changed in the early aughts. Like the newspapers just started tanking. They were not buying comic strips like they used to be. And it just got harder to make it or even to break into the daily newspaper comic industry. And so I started learning more about web comics. And so in 2004, I had a daily comic strip that was published on the Viper Comics website. Viper Comics was this sort of small press indie comics book company based out of Texas. I don't think they're even around anymore. I think a few years
I'm not
back.
Sure.
Yeah, I feel like their website hasn't been up. Their website is still up, I believe, but it hasn't been updated since like 2016 or something like that. So that does not bode well for their existence. But I was with them for a few years, and that was like my education. That's how I got introduced to the business of comics and learned more about what all is going on behind the scenes. I got to go to a couple San Diego Comic-Cons and meet some heroes, and just all of that was a very educational time. Then I went out on my own in 2008 and was just a freelancer indie cartoonist for several years. And then around the time I had kids, it became harder and harder to make an excuse to hole up in my office and draw a daily comic strip. So I had to start thinking of a way to pursue the dream that was more conducive to my schedule as a husband and a father. And so I decided to start pitching book ideas to traditional publishers. And originally, Travis Daventhorpe was pitched as a picture book, a children's picture book, and was rejected by all the agents. There was one particular agent, however, who told me that I had a middle grade concept in a picture book format, and that if I aged it up, she'd be willing to look at it again. Well, I didn't know at the time what the heck middle grade was. So I researched as much as I could. I read a bunch of Captain Underpants, and which I now understand is like, that's kind of like a young middle grade. So I reimagined Travis Daventhorpe as this sort of illustrated chapter book. Like, I may have even sent you some of that. Did I send you?
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I feel like you did. I want to say you did. I know at the time you were doing it. But I don't remember whether or not I actually saw the manuscript or not.
I feel like
thinking about it.
I know that along the way you got to see a lot of the behind the scenes on that. But
I definitely remember you doing it that way. That was one of the questions I was going to have. Was like, I know that journey has changed a lot because it went from sort of like more of a prose picture book, chapter book style format back over to comics. And I was interested in
I was
just hearing kind of explain it.
I was avoiding doing a graphic novel because I was scared of the work. It would be a lot of work.
It's understandable.
Yeah. And so I was trying to think, like, how can I have something that's got a lot of illustrations but still feels like I could crank this out in the time frame they want. And so that's why I kind of leaned toward the illustrated chapter book. And so we pitched that. I got an agent with that. And then we pitched it twice, 2 rounds of subs to like, 10 different editors each time. So 20 total, I think. It was rejected the first time. During the second round of submissions, my agent decided she was getting out of the game. And so she let all of her clients out of their contracts. And it was a scary time because I did not know what to do. Yeah. I should back up just a second. So we had pitched it as a chapter book. The second time we pitched it was not as a chapter book. The second time we pitched it was as a graphic novel. I finally bit the bullet and pitched it as a graphic novel. And while we were waiting for responses, she decided that she was going to get out of the game. And so I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I needed to get another agent, but I didn't know if I should use Travis Daventhorpe because it had already been through the process once and 1.5 times, essentially. Yeah. Or if I should come up with a new idea. There's a text thread with me and a few of the clients that had been let go. And we were all kind of like encouraging each other. And I had shared with them my concerns, and they're like, pitch it. You need to pitch it again. You've got the whole package was done. Let the agents tell you no instead of you saying no. I was like, that makes sense. So I pitched it again to agents, got another agent. We tightened it up a little bit, sent it back out, and that's when I got the offer from First Second. So that brings us up to the current time.
Yeah. What a wild, it was so interesting watching that journey for you happen, because it did see it go from like being this picture book format. And I've thought about the same type of things. Like Last Kids on Earth is a fun comic. Like I love reading that comic. And there's such like a great synthesis of the words and the pictures. Like they're both telling the story really well. Obviously, because Douglas is a fantastic illustrator, and Max is a great writer. But I've thought about that same thing too. I'm like, I almost wonder if I should do more of that sort of thing. But part of it too is like there's so few of us, I think, that can make comics and make them really well at this sort of level. And I think there's like a hunger, from what I've understood, like finding people who can make graphic novels and make them well is not super easy, especially in the kids game. And so I wonder if that's part of it. Like it's almost like when you're pitching prose, it's like you're playing in this like ocean of people who are all trying to crack that egg, and then you go from like an ocean of people to like a lake who are like trying to figure out how to pitch a comic. But the problem is like the comic book market is growing so fast in the kids space. They're just like anxious to find people. And so it's I'm so glad you did, because not because I think you can't be a fantastic prose writer, but because I know you're a fantastic graphic novelist.
Yeah.
So,
and I agree. I think that, you know, when I was pitching it as a chapter book, that was fun. And it was a lot, that whole journey was, I mean, I did a crash course on story structure and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, learned a lot during that time. But when I decided to, with my first agent, when I asked her, I said, should I just make this a graphic novel? And she said, why don't you pick a scene and just draw it,
mm-hmm.
comic pages, and see what you think? And I loved it, man. It was my wheelhouse. I mean, I've been loving comics since I was a kid, and I realized in that moment, I'm like, why am I trying to walk away from something just because I'm scared of the work? I'm trying to walk away from something I know that I love to do and that I'm good at. Mm-hmm. And I felt like it told the story even better than what I was doing in the chapter book. Because like with prose, I enjoy writing, but mm-hmm. Sometimes I have these, you know, these ideas in my head, and I don't know how to write them effectively, but I can draw them. I can draw the facial expression. I know how, like sometimes when I'm trying to write out outlines with my editor before we draw anything and give them an idea, and I'll be like, Travis has his eyebrow raised and his lip curled, and I'm like, and that's true what he's doing, but it's not the actual, like, he's disgusted or something like that. Like, and I'm trying to like make that picture for them visually with words, and I'm just not as good at it as I am just drawing it out. So
I have a sort of a similar-ish kind of origin too, like where I had an agent early on for Adamsville. Actually, it was my agent for Adamsville, and this was like a decade plus ago. I mean, well before even the current iteration of it. And it was funny because at one point he goes like, "Why don't you send me a prose version? Like, we'll consider pitching something prose wise." And I sent it to him. And he's like, "Yeah, let's go back to comics." So it was like, it's like, you know, I like writing, but same thing. It's like, and I just can't get what is in my head out in words, and I kind of get bored of it. Like, I love reading, but I am the slowest novel reader. Like, I don't get through books. Like I was saying in the conversation with Michael Regina, the other Michael Regina, I'm like, I still haven't read all Lord of the Rings, and I'm like, how, you know? So I'm trying to go through it. It's just most of it's because I'm just a slow reader. So like I wrestle with this. Like, I would love to write prose, but I'm like, I don't know if I love it enough to become really good at it. You know what I mean? Whereas comics, it's like, I want to be really good at this. And
I think you and I also have a similar thought process. Like, I think we see things cinematically. I know you love movies, and I do too. And one of my biggest, like, one of my favorite things as a dad is my kids, they're excited to see the Ninja Turtles movie coming out. And I'm like, I'm probably more excited to see it. And they're watching it for one, you know, they're being entertained, and I'm being entertained too, but I'm paying attention to like the shots they pick, how they're framing the characters, all that kind of, and you take those ideas and you put them into your comics. Because I think comics are the way you can paste them very cinematically.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a visual thing. And I think that way. Like in my head, like I think of, I don't know how you write. I know for me, when I'm coming up with the stories, I'm very plot driven. It's very plot heavy. And I see the action in my head and how I want to play it out. And I give that to my editor, and he's like, "Okay, now why are the characters doing this?" And I'm like, "Dang it, because it's awesome. That's why they're doing
that's right."
But yeah, like that's all because I think of the cinematic stuff comes first, and that's the easiest. And then I have to go back and do what my editor says and fill in the blanks and figure out why these things are happening. That's the most important part. But yeah, that's why I think comics work so well for guys like us.
Yeah, it's I struggle with that too, because people always like start with character and then develop plot, and I'm like, but I don't get excited until I know the plot. Like,
Right.
I want a story to have deep meaning. Like, I
Yeah.
don't mean that at all, but I'm like, more importantly, like, I gotta have a thing that gets me excited to sit at the drawing board and like make that idea happen.
Exactly.
It doesn't like, but I don't get excited about an idea until I have both pieces. I'm noticing, like I might be like, yeah, that'd be a cool thing, like with Deepwater Creek, and I was like, yeah, I want to tell a story that's like a giant fish monster story. That sounds cool. And then, but I was like, oh, but what if it's about overcoming fear? You know, like, and then I related it back to my own personal experiences, and then it became a personal story wrapped up with a plot that was very interesting. Same thing with The Sleepover. It was like, I wanted to tell a story. I was like, man, this idea of like kids trapped inside of a house with a monster babysitter sounds really cool. But until it became, let me retell this story of what it was like to lose a nanny at a young age and sort of have this whole thing upended. And then it was that meaning and the why all came together. But even then, it's like a weird amorphous process all the way to like the end. I told my editor, I'm like, I will be rewriting this book until you tell me it's pencils down because it's at the printer. Like, that's just how we're working. Like, just get you ready for it, you know?
Yeah. I know that feel, man.
So I know you said something recently, because I'm actually really intrigued by this, because you asked, like, you don't know what my process is like. I like to write everything out in script format and then do the thumbnails. I probably get through 5-6 drafts of a book before, just in written form, before I finally go like, I feel comfortable enough with this to start thumbnailing. But I think you said you were going from synopsis this time straight to thumbnails.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How is that going?
We did that on book 2, and it ended up working out really well. So my editor, I'm really blessed. I have a really great editor, and he has worked with he's edited a lot of graphic novels. He's currently writing a graphic novel, and he just gets it. And he knows that I think visually, and that it's harder for me, like we've just discussed, you know, the writing part with the words. Dialogue, I'm all day. I love dialogue. That's another reason why I like comics. The way people talk, the hesitations and all that stuff. I love that. So what the first book, we had a complete script written out. I had this modified graphic novel script. And he was like, you know what? If you think you can write, so what we did, like a very detailed outline. He said, just do like every act, every scene of the book, all the beats, give me very detailed. So the whole thing's like 4 or 5 pages long.
Yeah.
And if you can, with each scene, just kind of guess how many pages you think it's going to be. And so I will write like act 1, scene 1, and then it'll be like a paragraph of what's going to happen in that scene. And then next to scene 1, I'll put 4 to 6 pages. And I can ballpark it pretty good, I've found. Like, sometimes I'm a little over, sometimes I'm a little under. A lot of times I'm right there in the middle or right on with what I guess it's going to be. And so we use that to kind of gauge what the page count's going to be. Of course, we know that once I get going, that's going to change probably a little bit. But yeah, once he sees that and he sees where I'm going, and that's just the overall story, he tells me to go ahead and start thumbing it. Now, what I do is, for myself, I'll make a script. That helps me to kind of plan out my page layouts. But at that point, I don't care about how it looks or how it reads, as long as I understand it. And so it's very quick. You know, it takes me probably, what I have is a schedule, a drawing schedule. So I have to have, this many scenes done by such and such date, and then the next few scenes, and then the next few scenes, so on and so forth. And what I'll do is, when I go from batch to batch, I'll spend about an hour putting the script putting the script together, and then for those scenes, and then taking the text and putting it onto my Photoshop files where I have my panels, and then I'll share them with Procreate on my iPad, and then I'll start putting it all together that way.
So that's I'm really curious about this, because I know, like, in my mind, like, the process I want is, like, I want like this really nice finished script that, like, you'd enjoy reading the script. And the reality that I'm discovering is, like, it's just too slow. It's not I hesitate not to be answered, because speed does not mean better. but it's a question of like, how can I get something that I feel better about quicker? And so I've been toying around a lot with this. It sounds like maybe something like what you're doing might be worth just doing as well, where I sent my last thing I sent my editor was like a really detailed outline. It was maybe 8-9 pages of every bullet point, every thought. And that's what he based a lot of his feelings on about like whether the story was or wasn't working. But yeah, I'm just trying to find a way to get there quicker. And so I'm trying doing rewrites through thumbnails explicitly, but it's to hear that you still do write something out. Because I know like guys like Kazu, it seems like he writes the whole thing on paper, like in his thumbnails. And that I'm like, I can't do that because I feel like if I change dialogue or something, I'm like erasing everything out. But if I start with maybe a rough script, like you're saying, it's at least I have the dialogue there and I kind of know, I know what my goal is for that page. Sitting
and a
down
lot
with
of
the blank
the
page
outline is just dialogue when I do it.
Yeah.
I was just looking at my outline for book 3, and it's 26 pages, which is way more than 4 or 5. What I told you, but still, it's not a. It's written in such an easy way for me. I don't overthink it. I'm not trying to worry about format. I'm just putting it all there, and I make it clear for him to read, and then he gives me notes back. Yeah.
Well, it's because comics are like such a multidisciplined form of creation. Like I think like my mentality is to forget that like its finished form is finished book. And so like this desire to like have a nice script and this desire to have like these things like serves no real function to the reader at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like all the reader's going to care. So I don't know. I've been trying to break down my thinking process on this because the project I want to do after Deepwater Creek is more of a series type thing. And I'm like, I need to figure out a way to move a little bit quicker just to get to something more tightly bound a little bit faster and not getting so tied up with having this really real written script or something. It's like, I think we can get there sooner. So that's interesting. Did you actually feel like it actually made you faster, or was it just more of a comfortability thing?
It's both. The first book is, people always ask me like, how long did it take to make the first book? And it's so hard to gauge because the first one has been in process since 2017 and it's changed shape. And then by the time it got to the editor at first second, I mean, it was the first, well, I had a whole script. And so of the whole book. And so, it was a tightening more screws on it, but it was pretty much done. The second book, we started from scratch and we used that process of just doing the detailed outline. And it took just a little over a year, maybe 14 or 15 months.
To do the whole book?
To do the whole thing, yeah.
That's crazy.
And so I'm anticipating that for this time. But it's already going a bit slower than I would like, and I've been missing a lot of deadlines, and that's because I've been using a lot of my I still have a day job too. Yeah. So I've got a day job, and now I'm promoting a book, and so I've been scheduling those like school visits, book signings, festivals are usually on weekends and my days off, and that's the times I've been using to draw. So it's been cutting into that pretty heavy, so more than I anticipated, honestly. But my editors are understanding so far. I haven't gotten in trouble yet, so they're working with me.
I'm 2.5 years into Deepwater Creek, and we still don't have a pen down story, and that's like bananas to me. I'm like, where did these 2.5 years go? Like, I don't understand what happened.
It's crazy.
Part of it from our end was we were there was a bit of a debate on what the next book was going to be. And I think my editor got busier and I couldn't crack the story. And it was like a year where we just weren't settled on what we were doing, And then finally I had to just call him and be like, I can't do this other story we were talking about. Like I'm too enamored with this other one. And so we lost basically a year of production pursuing another idea that other idea might come along. But that's sort of one of the challenges I'm discovering is doing kind of what I've been doing, which is like every book is its own thing, as opposed to like we finish this one and then the next thing's the sequel. Like you kind of very much know where you're going next.
Yeah.
This one, it's like I'm starting from scratch all over again.
Yeah.
Completely. You know, and I have to design a world and what's the conflict and what are the rules here. And that's very creatively stimulating, but it can be hard, you know, to figure that out.
I'm going to be in that boat soon because I'm under contract for 4 books. The series will go 4 books, and I'm working on the 3rd. So at the end of the 3rd, I want to start thinking about the next thing. And
do you have an idea yet?
I've got lots of ideas, and my problem is trying to figure out. Like, I have ideas to do a spinoff of Travis.
Yeah.
And so I got a few ideas for that. I got an idea for another story that would be just a completely different set of characters, different world. All of it middle grade. I'm in love with the middle grade.
Me too, man.
I think it's
perfect.
The storytelling is I can do the storytelling I want to do. You know,
yeah.
I've always liked all ages stuff, and I feel like this is like you still have. There's a sweetness and a nostalgia to middle grade for me, going back and kind of thinking about my own childhood, you know, but there's still
100%.
You can kind of brush up against, you know, losing some of that innocence, learning that the world isn't as bright and peachy as you thought when you were, you know, much younger, but it's still not like in this murky, like everything's despair or anything like that.
Yeah. It's not like, I hear you 100%. Like there was I went to a comics meetup locally on Saturday, and there was a young lady there who was asking me, like, did I make a conscious decision to make kids comics, or like, why did I end up over in this space? And I just told her, I was like, there was one, I felt like there weren't good at the time I made this decision. I think a lot has changed over the 10 years or so. There just was not a good, healthy comics space for children, you know? And so at the time I was like, if I were a kid right now, I don't know that I would get excited about comics like I was when I was a kid, you know? And so it sort of was made as a decision. I was like, I want to make books for kids. But same thing, I think in the long run, it's like, you can still have deeply meaningful conversations because there is sort of the beginning of that innocence from childhood to adulthood that's happening right in that space. And you can talk about big truths while still being highly entertaining. And so, yeah, I've taken to it really well, too. I wonder if I push the boundaries a little bit. It's been kind of interesting looking at some of the feedback I've gotten on the sleepover over time. But I still stand behind those decisions because I'm like, I know what I felt like as a kid, and I didn't want to be talked down to. And so I'm not going to talk down to them, and we're going to spell things out as they are, you know? Yeah. I'm with you.
Sleepover was beautiful. I don't know. I can't think. I read it multiple times, and I have not had. You need to tell me later what the.
I can tell you right now because it might be interesting just for anyone who hears. Like there's just sort of like, oh, this is maybe a little bit more intense than I would have anticipated, or you know, it gets pretty heavy, and there's a part of me there that, especially as I'm making Deepwater Creek, where I'm like, I want to make something that isn't quite so heavy, because the book is, when I was making it, it felt very fun, but like looking back over the time, it is fun, but like there is sort of this heavy meditation on grief and what it's like to lose somebody and what that does to somebody if they don't properly deal with their stuff, you know? And so with the next one, I'm like, I want to do something meaningful, but a little bit more lighthearted.
Sure.
You know, but yeah, it was a lot of that. It was just sort of like, was this too dark for the age range? Like I tried to make Swan a legitimate threat to the kids. I tried to make, I have this thing when I make kids horror where like, I want the kids to feel kid-like, but when the scary thing comes, like I want it to feel legitimately scary, you know? And so I think that juxtaposition maybe was not expected by some people. I still stand behind it because that's what I would have wanted, but it was an interesting reaction.
Yeah, that is interesting. I don't know. I compare Sleepover to me, like it's got that, it's like it's chasing that vibe of like Goonies and Echo. Is that one, or 8mm?
Echo. Oh, you mean a Super 8?
Yeah, Super 8. Thank you.
Yep.
8mm.
Yeah, very different movie. On 8
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that one, but that one is that's a rough movie, right?
Kids. Oh God!
It's a
But
rough
you know,
movie.
I feel
Yes, I'm
like,
with you.
and I told you too. Swan, when she turns into the monster, is some of the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen you do. Like, it is just.
Oh, thank you.
I just sit there and stare at those pages. Like, I don't know if monsters can be beautiful, but I think she is a beautiful, beautiful monster. Scary.
Oh, thank you.
But just so well drawn. There's a texture to her. Excuse me, a texture that you use on like the feathers and everything, and the eyes, and it's just really, really good. And
Thanks,
Goonies. I was a freaked out kid anyway. Goonies scared me.
There's some scary stuff in there.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Ghostbusters. I'm a huge Ghostbusters fan, but Ghostbusters freaked me out when I was a kid. I don't know. I think there's a point though where you start realizing like it's still safe because the good guys win, and
exactly.
You always have that kind of in there. You can kind of rely on that. When it gets too intense, okay, I think they're not going to let me down. The good guys are going to win.
Right. Yes. Yeah, and I think my general optimistic view on things comes through. I think in the end, it's like I love M. Night Shyamalan's work, and he talks about that a lot. He's like, I want to show how dark things get, so I can show that there's something still good at the end.
Absolutely.
And so, it's just that it's a balance with kids, but yeah, same thing where like I just really love this medium. I don't see me leaving the kids area. And it's not that could never happen, but I just feel like there's so many more stories to tell here, so I don't plan on going.
And I don't feel limited. I do you have?
No, I don't either.
When I'm at a festival or a signing or something, and they ask, "What's the age group? What's the age group for this book?" Do you get that question a lot?
Oh yeah, all the time.
I always say, well, we're marketing it towards middle grade, like 8 years old to 12 years old, but I've got friends who are 44 years old and they like it. I just feel like I put it in the vein of like, if you like comics, if you like good stories, you're going to enjoy books like ours. They're written for everybody.
Same. That's usually my answer too. The only caveat I tend to have to bring into it is because of the scare piece is like just saying like, you're really gonna have to gauge your own child on whether or not you think it's going to be too creepy for them.
Yeah, true. That's true.
If it's like because I know some kids that are young and it doesn't bother them at all, and then some kids are older and like I can't do that one. It freaks me out. It's totally fine. So that's usually the only like one. I'm like, that's awesome, cool.
Yeah, that's secretly you're like,
yeah, exactly. Like I'm not here to give your kids nightmares, but I do want them to. I want to effectively be a scary writer. And so, but my general attitude is like, just, gauge your kid. Let it, if you think it's too much for them, it may not be right. It doesn't matter what the age is, but yeah, so I usually say like 8 and up. I think adults would enjoy it just as much as kids would,
Yeah.
I've been getting deep into Lord of the Rings for about the last month and a half, 2 months or so, way more than I ever had before. Like I was a fan of the movies. Now I've gotten into reading, finished the Rings of Power yesterday, which I thought was fantastic. Like I know the gripes people have with the changes that they made, and I'm like, I don't care as long as you make the show work. Like it just needs to work on its own. Like my favorite movie ever is Jaws, and it's a complete butchering of the novel, and it's probably better for it. It's not held in the same regard as Tolkien. But what is so cool about it is like, man, just like how much his worldview is just steeped into like everything that's happening here. And that even idea that Gandalf is like an angel or something, essentially. Like I had no idea like how this all worked,
There's this line at the end of Lord of the Rings that I just think is so profound where, the story, like the major epic has come to its conclusion, right? Sort of this really long resolution that he writes where he ties up as many loose ends as he can, and there's this line from Gandalf where I think he's telling the hobbits, they're talking about Sauron being dead, and is that the end of all the bad? Did we finally like, is this utopia now? And Gandalf says something to the effect, I'm going to butcher it, but he says something to the effect of, no, there will still be evil. And we'll have to overcome those when they arise. But for now, we can kind of rest. And there's like this, I love that. Like, you know, you beat Sauron, but there's going to be somebody else who's going to try to do what Sauron did. Not only does it leave the door open for more stories to be told, but I think it's also a truth about the world we live in. Like, I don't know.
This brings up an interesting thing to whatever degree we want to get into it together. But, you know, one of the things that connected me with you early on is, you know, I'm a Christian. In your faith, you live out your faith very publicly in this space. And that was encouraging to me, especially as I was trying to figure out my way in here. You know, what are your thoughts about that? And as far as like bringing your faith into your work, what challenges have you sort of felt with it? Obviously, we don't create explicitly for Christians with these books, but it obviously permeates our books just like it, you know, someone who isn't a Christian, their worldview permeates their book. So just kind of wondering what your thoughts are on, are you doing any of that consciously? Is that something, you know, you're thinking through?
My view of this has always been, and even when I was young in the game, like your faith, whatever your ideals are going to make their way into your work, whether you're trying to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's definitely true with Travis. And I've tried to, like, you know, I'm very much trying not to make a what we would consider like an evangelical treatise or anything like that in my book.
Or even maybe as direct allegory as like Lewis did with
I don't want to do that.
Aslan or something like that.
I like Tolkien. I like what he did. Like I appreciate C.S. Lewis, and I read all of the Chronicles of Narnia. I think the books that Disney translated to movies, I think those are the strongest books. I understand why they chose those. The rest of them are fun, but those, you know, the Wardrobe, the Prince Caspian, the Voyage of Dawn Pair, those are definitely the most exciting books in the series. And probably the most the biggest allegories, all that stuff's in there. And I like what Tolkien does, where the faith stuff's there, but it's not like heavy-handed. It's not in your face. There's these concepts that are there, and I like that. And with Travis, I've been trying to do that and trying to be very chill about it. I think it's the idea that, you know, I've grown up in a Christian tradition. There is a deity in my book, and I'm pulling a lot from what I've experienced as a Christian. So that's going to be in there. I will say that the overall story, the sort of inspiration, like as far as like the backbone of it, I suppose, is 1 Samuel in the Bible. I think that 1 Samuel especially is one of the best stories in the Bible. Like, it's got everything. It reads
like a novel.
It does, right?
It's kind of crazy. Yeah.
You've got the King Saul, who is this such a great character. Like, you know, he's a great dude, and then he gets his power, and then it goes to his head, and he becomes corrupted by his ego and his power and his quest for fame and all that stuff. And then you've got Samuel, who's like Gandalf, and then you've got David, who is your unlikely hero, and he's got, you know, he fights a Goliath, and he fights, you know, all the stuff like builds up, and so I've definitely been like using that like as my guide for this book. Like, you know, Travis is the David character, and the bad guy, the Nolan Victus character, is based on King Saul. In fact, he was the king of Solistera and then became corrupted because of his own hubris. And so that's why Bella, who is the Samuel character, is going back and trying to find someone else to take his shoes. And he's actually leaning on the deity more, which is what Samuel did. The first time God said, Samuel, you go pick him. And Samuel picked who became the wrong guy. And then the second time, God's like, I'm going to tell you who it is. And that's when he finds David. And so that's what happens in my book.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So all those little key pieces are there. I like those little beats. I'm not trying to retell that story word for word or even, but those beats I think are great. And I've been leaning on those the entire series.
Yeah, it's interesting even talking about how those things get brought in, because they're obviously like you said, I'm not trying to make explicitly religious things, but I am a religious person, you know, and I don't want to be like afraid to talk about the world as I see it, you know, and because no one else is. Like, no one else is afraid to tell you how they feel about the world. Yeah. And, you know, and I think that voice is just as much needed as anybody else. And so, but I'm with you. It's like, I don't want people, here's the problem. Like when it's bad storytelling, and I think this applies whether it's religious or not religious, when it's agenda over story. And I don't mean message over story. Message, I think, is integral to story. Like, you can't have a story without a message. I mean, agenda over story. Like when you have a worldview you want to impose upon your readers that has absolutely nothing about the thing you're trying to do, you know, that just doesn't work real well, you know.
I love how you delineate that. That's so good.
Yeah, it's because I said this actually. It was Jason Brubaker and I were chatting, and he was saying I don't have. He kind of clarified that for me too, because I was like, this sort of feels like often like we're more message over story. And he's like, no, like. Messages is story. You know, what are you trying to communicate? So he's like, I have no problem with that. It's when it's done with an air of agenda that it doesn't ring as true, and it doesn't ring as solid storytelling. I mean, like you look at something like Tolkien, or even things that are not religious at all. We enjoy them whether they're religious or not, because there's an integrity and honesty to the storytelling that resonates, whether you agree with the worldview or not. There's stories that I love that I completely disagree with the worldview, but they're told with a certain amount of integrity. And I'm like, yeah, I hear what you're trying to tell me. You know,
exactly. I mean, I listen to so much music and watch so many movies, and I enjoy them, and I actually appreciate the different
perspectives.
Yeah. Because sometimes they give you stuff that you didn't think about or consider before, and so you need to consider those things. But I think, you know, it always amazes me, like C.S. Lewis. I feel like it's so obvious, at least to me, the connections he's making in his books, yet they are still so popular among people who don't have faith, who are not people.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they, in some way, he was able to tackle those, you know, those key components of what we consider Orthodox Christianity, but do it in a way that was fun, and it wasn't beating people over the head. And
it's a weird, hard line to try to find.
It is, and I'm afraid to even search for it. I don't.
I've had some of that come up with Adamsville specifically, which has been strange. Well, not strange, because it was intentional on my part. Like, I wanted to tell a religious, non-religious story, you know, like none of the characters in it are professing any sort of faith, but like the sort of mythology that's steeped underneath this whole conspiracy was like, what if we took, you know, oh gosh, I have to be careful here. I'm not to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it, but what if we play with religion the way Indiana Jones plays with religion? You know, it's like, you know, like, let's assume that these things are true. And then how do we tell an interesting story with them, but not one that's like trying to be explicitly religious? But it's weird because it puts the book in like such a weird space that like trying to find a home for it outside of self-publishing is sort of a challenge. It's kind of interesting because it's straddling the line, I think, a little closer than than some things might straddle it, you know. It's kind of an interesting thing. But
have you ever seen The Exorcism of Emily Rose?
Yeah.
So I think that's a great example of a movie that you don't realize is actually about faith. Like, that's I recommend that movie all the time to people, and I'm not a huge horror fan. It has to be something really good, really well written, and I think I consider that to be one that is like. So on the surface, you think this is a exorcism movie, right? And that sounds fun and exciting, but it's actually a courtroom drama.
Yeah, it's such a cool concept.
Yeah, you got this priest who's on trial because this girl died during an exorcism, and they're trying to decide, you know, is he guilty of murder or manslaughter or whatever, because he didn't give her medical care. He gave her supernatural care, spiritual care.
Yeah.
And you see both sides. So you see like this, you know, these scenes where the girl looks like she's possessed by a devil, and then you see the same scene, but it could be she's having epilepsy. And very, very cool. It's very well done. And at the end of the movie, you get this great, this sort of, they kind of champion the concept of faith. And they do it in a way that's very tasteful, I think. It's not heavy-handed. It's not like watching, you know, any of those Kirk Cameron movies or whatever, where it's just really in your face. But I don't know. It was really done well, I thought. And I like that kind of story. I like that. I like, I guess in a way, so the director of that said, they asked him why he's a Christian. And they asked him why he makes horror movies. That's all he did, like Hellraiser and all these different things. And he said because in horror is one of the only places you can talk about the Christian faith, because there's much mystery around it, you know. And so he relies on that. I think the same is true with fantasy. Maybe not necessarily Christian faith, but faith in general, because there's deities and gods and goddesses and different things you can play on, and you can introduce those elements. And
there's sort of a baseline acceptance of the supernatural.
Exactly.
And, you know, so it does. I've had the same thought. I'm like, because I'll have people at church ask me, they're like, how are you so into horror? Like, why is this your thing? And I'm like, well, because I feel like I can talk about the subjects I want to talk about, because we assume in a supernatural realm, a spiritual realm, like there's certain baseline assumptions that we're all coming to horror with. And I don't have to ask you to come along that journey with me. And then we can talk about big and like, look, there's plenty of horror that has nothing to do with religion, but you can talk about those concepts much easier in that format, whether it's any specific worldview, because of that sort of backdrop. You know, like one of my favorite examples of that is the movie Signs, M. Night Shyamalan Signs. Like how he does an alien invasion movie, but it's really a conversation between a man and God. You know?
The beautiful story. There's a I'm gonna mess it up. It's the David. I think I'm saying it right. The David Bad series. She's an agent sibling of mine. She's got this huge City of Brass, I think is the first book in the series. And she's Muslim. And so her faith is in the book. And it relies a lot on like Muslim, like genies. Like I didn't realize I have such a Western white bread concept of what a genie is, but they're actually, you know, a part of the, you know, I want to be very respectful of our Muslim friends, but that's very part of their culture. And so she puts all that into this story, and it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. Yeah. It actually gives you, if you're not familiar with that culture, it gives you kind of a taste of more so than what you would get in like, you know, Aladdin or something like that.
Oh gosh. Like my favorite novel ever is Life of Pi. And I don't know if you ever read the book. I read it long before the movie came out. Did you see the film or read the book?
I saw clips of the film, and that's been a book that's been on my TBR for probably as long as it's been out, and I have just not gone around reading it.
It's amazing. I mean, and especially if you are a person of faith, it's an interesting book. And what's interesting about it, and I've gotten grief over this, is that it's about a boy who's Muslim. Or no, he's Hindu. Yes, he's Hindu. But through the process of being a young kid growing up in India, and because of sort of the ability for kind of Hindu religion to like assimilate other religions and then not be like the end of the world for them, he sort of becomes a Muslim, Christian, Hindu. And the whole book is this interesting meditation on who God is and what is faith and how is God telling stories, and it's amazing. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. And and the ending just left me gobsmacked. It's yeah, you need to read it. I think you really enjoy it. It's not what you kind of think about it at the surface, and then you read and you're like, what was that?
The best stories are, right? The ones they suck you in like that. I find that I don't always need someone to share my faith, but when you connect with someone who has faith, I don't know, there's something really cool about that. And so, and that, whether that's through a book or through meeting somebody, I don't know.
I'm interested in it's. I think maybe what it is it's like just having the conversation.
Yeah,
you know, and having it in a story like Damon Lindelof, who is one of the co-creators of Lost and has gone on to do a lot of other great stuff. I don't think he would just ascribe himself as a religious person at all, but like he's very interested in talking about like who is God, what is faith, what is the afterlife, and it's just interesting to see someone engaging this subject matter. I may not agree with anything, and I'm just like, yeah, I want what you got to say, man. Let's listen. You know,
well, like Lost has heavy tones of spiritual and faith, and all that kind of, and you could probably ascribe any number of religions to it. And then didn't he do a movie or show after that, like for HBO?
The Leftovers.
That's it. So that was like, I love the concept of that, where it was sort of like a rapture event, but they kind of stripped away the religion of it because he said, imagine if that happens, there's going to be people who believe it's the Christian rapture. They're going to think, no, it's this other event. And I'm like, that's absolutely brilliant. That's because that's totally what would happen. Like that's the reality of it. So I love that concept.
It's the Leftover show I kind of got into slowly because I was nervous about it because I just heard something. I was like, I don't know about this one. And then when I remember what it was is that he had finished Lost and people were so divided about the ending of that. And when he made The Leftovers, he said, I'm never going to give you the answer. Like, because he was like, I don't want to give you an answer. Like, the point of the show is not the answer. The point is, like, what happened to these people following this event? It was like, what if the rapture happened, but, like, the end of the world never happened? It's like everyone just kind of, all these people disappear, and we're just supposed to keep going on with life. And, but I got into it, and it was honestly one of the best shows I've ever watched. And by the end of it, it's very adult, obviously, but it's by the end of it, it was one of the most interesting like meditations on religion and faith and grief, and it's just there's a certain like level of honesty with his writing that even if I agree or don't agree, I just really appreciate that he's willing to tell that sort of subject matter and do it honestly. And one of the things I so appreciate is that he's fair to all sides of the argument. Which means that he's fair to the religious people, he's fair to the non-religious people, and it's not so much picking villains as much as it is about there are people who are faithful who are genuinely great people, and then there's people who aren't, and then there's people on all like you know what I mean. There can kind of be this trope of like the religious person's the nut job that everyone hates. Like you'll see it in Stephen King stuff sometime, and it's like well here's the crazy person, but he just doesn't always treat them that way, and I really appreciate that because it helps me get on board with what he's trying to say a little bit more.
No doubt.
Yeah, so it's a worthwhile show, but Life of Pi 100%. The movie is actually really good too.
I'll bump that up on the list then.
Well, Wes, it's really awesome to sit around and chat comics with you. We'll have to do it again. Definitely interested in picking up Travis, the Daventhorpe 2. When's that supposed to come out?
It comes out next March. March 19th is the release date for it. 2024.
Is your angle like one every year around the March?
That is the goal. And at this point, it looks like book 3 might have to be pushed back to like summer or fall. I'm really hoping we can still make the March deadline, but the deadline window has been a little tighter on book 3, and I've been busy with promoting it. So it's been a little hard to stay on top of things, but it will be out in 2025. So
awesome. Well, I can speak for my whole family and other friends who've read it. It's a fantastic piece of cartooning, and
thanks, man.
And your talent is just like, there's other questions I could ask you just about some of the decisions that you make, like get super technical, but like just because I'm just curious, I'm like, oh, what were you thinking about that? So maybe we'll have to do it again when
Part two, man.
when part 2 comes out. But
Yeah.
I appreciate you hanging out. I know I've taken up a good bit of your time, but look forward to the next book, man. Thanks
Heck yeah,
for
man.
being a good friend.
Heck yeah. Same to you.